Sometimes I think we need less interfaith dialogue and more interfaith conflict. Now, when I say that, it's like a half joke because I think interfaith dialogue is very important. But at the same time, I think it's equally important to acknowledge the differences that we have and acknowledge where different religions conflict with each other. One thing that I think we all should acknowledge is something that I wasn't personally willing to acknowledge when I was younger. That all of the world religions do not have the same underlying truth or underlying message. I remember in high school, my mom got me this book called The Truth About the Five Major Religions. Now, when I look at the book, it kind of makes me laugh because the cover is kind of sketchy in my opinion, but it was a really good introduction to the world religions. And in addition to introducing the five major religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the author also had like this central thesis about world religions. Basically, starting with Hinduism and ending with Islam, she felt like every single world religion, every single major world religion added something to our knowledge about God. So basically, our knowledge about God was increasing over time because the prophets kept on coming and coming and coming. So what she was trying to get at in the book was that there is a central kind of underlying truth beneath the world religions, but that God was just slowly trying to get us to that truth over time. But my problem with that is that if God is trying to teach us about himself, why would he have such differing doctrines and world religions? For example, bringing it back to the whole conflict thing, it really bothers me when people kind of underemphasize the differences between Christianity and Islam, for example. Because recently I was in a conversation with these two people, one who was Christian and one who was Muslim. And the Muslim one said, oh, well, the two religions aren't that different. Both of us have Jesus. And that's why I wish I would have emphasized, yeah, you both have Jesus, but what does Jesus say in the Quran versus the Bible? Because just to be clear, yes, Jesus is in the Quran, but he definitely doesn't believe in the Trinity. He doesn't believe that he's God. So at that point, is he really the same Jesus? Not really. You can take the same thing and apply it to God as well. Because a lot of times people argue that Christians, Muslims, and Jewish people all worship the same God because they're Abrahamic faiths. But how is that possible if in Judaism, God is one, and then in Christianity, God is three in one, and then in Islam, God is one, but Muhammad is his final messenger? I understand why there's an urge to say that everyone worships the same God because there should be unity, and they're all Abrahamic faiths, and they're not that different from each other, but honestly, they are. The concept of God in Christianity is very different from the concept of God in Islam, for example. And just because the word Allah means God does not mean you're talking about the same dude. Just like when Jewish people talk about God, they're not talking about the God of the New Testament. Here's an analogy I recently came up with. Imagine you were talking to this dude about a guy named Martin Xavier Smith. Imagine you were talking about Martin and you said he's a 6'2" black dude with a great smile and amazing with women. And the dude next to you said, Martin Xavier Smith, Xavier, I know a dude named Martin Xavier Smith, but he was a 5'9" white dude, terrible teeth, even worse with women. Imagine how dumb the both of you would look if you just said, well, his name is Martin Xavier Smith, we must be talking about the same dude. And that is what frustrates me about the whole Allah versus God thing, or just religions in general using the same word God. If God has different characteristics in different religions, how are we possibly talking about the same thing? And again, when I was thinking of this video and explaining to people how I wanted to make this argument, I remember my friend Ryan was like, well, is the point of this to create more religious intolerance? And the answer is no, it's not. My reasoning, rather, is first and foremost just to acknowledge what the truth is. We should acknowledge that religions are different simply because they're different, and not acknowledging that would make us ignorant. I'm not going to say any BS about it allows us to see the unique beauty in every religion, because that's not how I feel about it. But in the whole conflict versus unity vein, I think it's important for us to better understand our differences so that our tolerance towards other religions isn't just ignorant tolerance, it's actual tolerance. Because that's my whole problem with the whole, oh, we all worship the same God thing. It's like our tolerance and our unity is based off of essentially a lie. Especially because what happened to the time where people were cool with saying my religion is the best, y'all are wrong. I kind of miss those days. I wasn't even alive back then, but I miss those days. Because honestly, I think the whole believe what you want to believe is kind of BS. Because there's no way you can have beliefs and not think your beliefs are the most right beliefs. Actually, the clip I'm about to show you is a couple of minutes long, but it expands on my point really well, and I don't think I could say it better myself.
Houston Smith, who published the most widely read primer on the world's religions, writes, "It is possible to climb life's mountain from any side, but when the top is reached, the trails converge. At base, in the foothills of theology, ritual, and organizational structure, the religions are distinct, but beyond these differences, the same goal beckons." I heard as well from Gandhi and from the Dalai Lama and from the popular religion writer Karen Armstrong, all religions are in essence one. They may differ in essentials, but essentially they are the same. Moreover, if you ask the all religions are one people, sometimes referred to as perennialists of the perennial philosophy, if you ask them what or who is at the peak of their mountain, their answers differ from one another. So if you inquire of Gandhi, what do you find at the top of the mountain where all these religions are converging? He would say God. If you ask Houston Smith, as I read him, he would not give a doctrinal answer, he would give an experiential answer. And he would say that at the top of the mountain, there is the mystical encounter, the mystical experience of the human person with the divine, the awareness that the essence of the human person is not distinct from the essence of the divine. And if you ask Karen Armstrong and the Dalai Lama, they will not give you a doctrinal or an experiential answer to the question. They will say that compassion is at the top of the mountain. This is an ethical response rather than a doctrinal or an experiential one. But the fact of the matter is that the world's religions start with very different analyses of the human problem and therefore strive toward very different goals. So it just isn't true that the beliefs and practices of the world's religions are essentially the same. But this view is also, as I said, condescending because it requires you to tell ordinary practitioners of these great religions that their beliefs and practices that they consider to be essential are somehow marginal and unimportant. To go to Houston Smith's metaphor, they are matters of the foothills rather than of the exalted mountaintop. So if a Christian friend tells you that Jesus was the only incarnation of God in human flesh and that he died on the cross to save you from your sins, then you need to pat him on the head and say that that's a very sweet idea, but that just isn't essential to Christianity. And if a Muslim friend tells you that the Quran is a warning urging every human being to submit to God by, among other things, praying 5 times a day and fasting during the month of Ramadan, then you need to pat her on the head and say, that's very sweet, my good Muslim friend, but that is not essential to the Islamic faith. You have misunderstood.
I think another reason that differences are important are because some of the differences are there for a particular reason, and they illuminate things that are emphasized in particular religions. Good example, Isaac and Ishmael in the Bible and the Quran. Basically, if you're a Christian, you're familiar with the whole story of Abraham almost sacrificing his son.
Isaac, mon fils.
Père, ça y est, tout est prêt.
Mais hélas, moi je ne le suis pas, Isaac.
Que faites-vous, père?
J'ai peur que ce ne soit toi qui fasses office d'agneau.
Comment ça, vous voulez dire que c'est moi qui vais être sacrifié en lieu et place de la bête? Eh bien, si telle est la volonté du Seigneur, je suppose que je n'ai pas d'autre choix que de m'y soumettre.
And then afterwards, they slaughter like a goat or like a sheep, whatever, instead.
Il n'est plus nécessaire de sacrifier ton fils, car dans ton cœur, tu l'as déjà offert au Seigneur. Je sais maintenant que ta crainte du Tout-Puissant est grande et que tu ne lui as pas refusé ton fils, car tu es son fidèle serviteur. Va en paix, Abraham.
Béni soit le nom de Dieu.
But if you're familiar with the story as a Christian or a Jewish person, then you think that the son that was almost sacrificed was Isaac, who is father of Jacob, who became Israel, right? But in the Quran, it's actually different. It's Ishmael, the son of Hagar, the slave or concubine. I don't know what they politically correct term is right now, don't cancel me. But it's her son that was almost sacrificed is in Islam, and they have two Eids, but the second Eid is pretty important, and it's about Abraham and almost sacrificing Ishmael. So it's an important story for them. But the difference in that story is important because it's supposed to express that Ishmael and the Arab people are the true kind of inheritors of the true message, which is Islam. Also, a side note, I do want to share that since Americans don't usually know that much about Islam, according to Muslims, the Kaaba in Saudi Arabia has to do with Abraham because he built it as a house of worship. And that's, of course, a huge part of Muslim worship as well. But of course, building the Kaaba isn't something you'll find in the Bible. I'm not trying to start religious conflict or nothing. I just thought it was a fun fact. But honestly, the main reason that I think understanding the differences between the different world religions is so important is because the fact that they have different characteristics and qualities means that they're not all equally good or equally bad. Basically, when I was younger, I went through different phases where sometimes I thought, if religions were good, they were all equally good, or if religions were bad, they're all equally bad. But I really don't think that's the case. And I've also heard people lump together religions in the same way, and I just don't really agree with it. Mainly because if they have different characteristics, that means that they can't all be on the same plane of like good or bad. For example, if a religion has more information about violence and advocating for violence, and less stuff about peace and worship, then I would kind of put them a little bit lower on the whole, greatness scale. One thing that I hear a lot is that at the end of the day, world religions, they all just want the same thing, for you to be a good person. And one, I don't think that's necessarily true with all the world religions. Two, even if it was true, the definition of what a good person is like completely different in each religion. For example, in Christianity, a very important part of being a good person in terms of salvation is also believing in Jesus as your Lord and Savior. For Judaism, it's more about like following the law and following what's prescribed to your people. For Hinduism, yes, you need to be a good person, but you also need to do all these different religious pilgrimages, all these different religious actions, all this different religious worship. Comparing different religions and their values and beliefs is like comparing apples to oranges. Not because like the usual saying, I guess I could use a different example of fruit, because apples and oranges are both fruit, but we shouldn't emphasize their fruitness just to promote unity when they're two completely different categories of fruit. The overall point I'm trying to make is that yes, we shouldn't fight over intolerance, but at the same time, we shouldn't be living in ignorance. I think it's important for us to learn about each other's religions, not just because it makes us more educated on a subject that's important to a lot of people, but also because it helps us truly know what we think about a belief system and also kind of learn more about our own belief system in the process.